The fluorescent lights of the hospital pharmacy cast harsh shadows across Maria's weathered face as she clutched the prescription bottle in her trembling hands. The pharmacist's words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. "That'll be $437, ma'am." Her 8-year-old son Timothy sat beside her in his wheelchair, his small chest rising and falling with labored breaths that had become all too familiar over the past 3 months. Maria's fingers traced the edges of her worn wallet, knowing exactly what she would find inside. $17.63. The same amount that had been there yesterday, and the day before that. She had counted it so many times that the bills felt soft as tissue paper between her fingers. The prescription for Timothy's bronchodilator medication might as well have cost $4 million for all the good it did her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the pharmacist asked, his voice gentle but tinged with the practiced patience of someone who had witnessed countless similar scenes. Maria looked up at him, this young man who probably made more in a week than she made in 2 months cleaning office buildings downtown. His name tag read David and his eyes held genuine concern, but what could he possibly understand about her situation? "I just need a moment," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigeration units that kept expensive medications cold and fresh. Timothy reached up with his small hand and touched her arm. Even at 8 years old, he understood more than any child should have to. He had learned to read the worry lines on his mother's face, to recognize the sound of her muffled crying late at night when she thought he was asleep. "Mama, it's okay," Timothy said softly, his voice raspy from the respiratory condition that had turned their lives upside down. "I feel better today. Maybe I don't need the medicine right now." The words broke Maria's heart because she could hear the lie in them. She could see how he struggled to catch his breath after speaking, how his lips held that slight blue tinge that sent ice through her veins every time she noticed it. Maria had been working 3 jobs to make ends meet even before Timothy's diagnosis. She cleaned offices from midnight to 6 in the morning, stocked shelves at a grocery store from 7 to 3 in the afternoon, and did laundry for neighbors in the evenings. Her hands were permanently cracked and dry from cleaning chemicals, her back ached constantly from lifting and bending, and she couldn't remember the last time she had slept more than 4 hours in a row. The medical bills had started small at first. A doctor's visit here, some tests there. But, as Timothy's condition worsened and required more specialized care, the numbers grew larger and more frightening. Even with the basic insurance she managed to afford through her main job, the copays and uncovered medications created a mountain of debt that seemed to grow taller every week. "Let me check if there's a generic version available," David the pharmacist offered, typing rapidly on his computer. Maria had heard this before. There was no generic for Timothy's specific medication. The doctor had already tried 3 different alternatives, and only this expensive brand-name drug seemed to help her son breathe without constant wheezing and coughing fits that left him exhausted. As they waited, Maria's mind drifted to the eviction notice that had arrived that morning. 60 days to pay the back rent or find somewhere else to live. She had begged Mrs. Patterson, their elderly landlord, for more time, but the woman's own financial struggles made sympathy a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm sorry, Maria," she had said, her voice genuinely apologetic. "But my own medical bills are piling up. I need reliable tenants who can pay on time." The apartment wasn't much, a small 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an old building where the heat barely worked in winter and the air conditioning never worked in summer. But it was home. Timothy's bedroom had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that she had put up when he was 5, back when his biggest worry was monsters under the bed instead of the monster growing in his lungs. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson," David said, his voice pulling her back to the present. "This is the only formulation that comes in Timothy's dosage. But let me talk to my manager about a payment plan or see if the manufacturer has any assistance programs." Maria nodded, though she had already called the pharmaceutical company twice. The assistance program had a waiting list 6 months long, and the income requirements were so strict that her 3 jobs actually worked against her. She made too much to qualify for help but too little to actually afford the medication. While David spoke with his manager, Timothy began to cough again. It started as a small tickle but quickly escalated to the deep, rattling sound that made Maria's stomach clench with fear. Other customers in the pharmacy turned to look, some with sympathy, others with the unconscious step backward that people take when confronted with illness they don't understand. "Here, baby," Maria whispered, rubbing Timothy's back in slow circles. She pulled out his emergency inhaler, a cheaper rescue medication that provided temporary relief but wasn't meant for daily use. Timothy took 2 puffs and, gradually the coughing subsided, but Maria could see the exhaustion in his young face. These episodes were becoming more frequent and more severe. The automatic doors of the pharmacy whooshed open, bringing with them a gust of cold November air and the figure of a tall man in an expensive overcoat. Alexander Sterling moved through the world with the confident stride of someone who had never worried about the price of anything. At 52, he was the CEO of Sterling Industries, a company that had made him wealthy beyond most people's imagination through innovative medical technology and pharmaceutical investments. Alexander had stopped by this particular pharmacy because it was convenient to his downtown office, and he needed to pick up a prescription for his blood pressure medication, a minor inconvenience in his otherwise carefully scheduled day. He was already pulling out his platinum credit card when he noticed the scene unfolding at the counter ahead of him. Maria's quiet desperation was palpable even from several feet away. Alexander had built his fortune by recognizing problems and finding solutions, and his trained eye immediately assessed the situation. The woman's clothing was clean but worn, her shoes practical but old, and the way she held her purse suggested someone who counted every dollar. The child beside her was clearly unwell, and the prescription bottle in the pharmacist's hand indicated a medication that Alexander recognized as particularly expensive. "What's the total amount again?" Maria asked David, though she had heard it clearly the first time. Sometimes saying the number aloud made it seem different, more manageable somehow. $437, David repeated gently. "But, Mrs. Johnson, my manager says we can set up a payment plan where you could pay $50 now and the rest in installments over 3 months. Maria's quick mental calculation told her what her heart already knew. $50 was almost 3 days of groceries for her and Timothy. The installment plan would mean an extra $145 per month on top of all their other expenses. It might as well have been $1,000. "I need to think about it," she said, her voice hollow. "Timothy, we need to go." As Maria began to turn her son's wheelchair toward the exit, Alexander found himself stepping forward. He had witnessed countless business negotiations, had made deals worth millions of dollars, but something about this moment felt different. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in the woman's voice despite her obvious desperation, or maybe it was the way the child looked up at his mother with such trust and love despite his own suffering. "Excuse me," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the pharmacy. Maria turned, and, for a moment their eyes met. Hers were brown and tired but filled with an intelligence and strength that impressed him. She was beautiful in the way that struggle sometimes makes people beautiful, carved and refined by hardship into something authentic and powerful. "I couldn't help but, over here," Alexander continued, aware that every word he spoke next could change the trajectory of this woman's day, possibly her life. "I'm Alexander Sterling. I work in medical technology, and I've been looking for someone with real experience navigating our healthcare system to help with a project I'm developing." Maria's first instinct was suspicion. In her neighborhood, when wealthy strangers offered help, there was usually a catch that involved taking advantage of people who had no other options. She had seen too many women fall for promises that turned out to be something entirely different than what was advertised. "What kind of project?" she asked carefully, her hand instinctively moving to Timothy's shoulder in a protective gesture. Alexander realized he was improvising, but his years in business had taught him to think quickly and speak with confidence even when he wasn't entirely sure of his next move. "I'm developing a patient advocacy program to help families navigate insurance and pharmaceutical assistance programs. Someone like you, who understands the system from the patient's side, would be invaluable in making sure we design something that actually works for real people." The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge that Maria wasn't sure she could trust to hold her weight. Timothy looked up at both adults with the keen attention of a child who had learned to read the subtle signals that adults thought they were hiding. "The position would involve consulting work initially," Alexander continued, "with the potential for full-time employment if things work out. The consulting fee alone would be enough to cover your son's medication costs plus provide some additional income. David the pharmacist watched this interaction with fascination. In his 3 years working at this location, he had never seen anything quite like this unfold. He could sense the genuine need in Maria's situation and something equally genuine in the well-dressed man's offer, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what motivated such a generous gesture from a complete stranger. Maria's mind raced through possibilities and dangers. This man could be legitimate, offering her a chance at financial stability that seemed too good to be true. Or he could be someone who preyed on desperate mothers, offering help that came with strings attached she couldn't afford to pull. But, as she looked down at Timothy's pale face and listened to his slightly labored breathing, she realized she might not have the luxury of being cautious. "What would this consulting work involve exactly?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning in her chest. Alexander pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. The cardstock was thick and elegant, with raised lettering that spelled out Alexander Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Industries. Below that was an address in one of the most expensive parts of downtown. "Why don't you come to my office tomorrow morning?" he suggested. "We can discuss the details properly, and I can show you what we're working on. In the meantime..." He turned to David behind the counter. "Please fill Mrs. Johnson's prescription and put it on my account." Before Maria could protest, Alexander had already handed over his credit card. David processed the payment quickly, as if he sensed that hesitation might give someone time to change their mind. The transaction completed with a soft beat that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "Sir, I can't accept this," Maria said, though her voice lacked conviction. The prescription bottle sitting on the counter represented hope for Timothy, relief from the constant worry about his breathing, and the possibility of peaceful sleep for both of them. "Consider it an advance on your consulting fee," Alexander replied smoothly. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. My assistant will have everything prepared for our meeting." Timothy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "the nice man is helping us like in the movies." Maria looked down at her son, then back at Alexander Sterling. This moment felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in stories she read online, but never to someone like her. She thought about all the nights she had prayed for a miracle, for some way to afford Timothy's medicine and keep their small apartment and maybe even save enough money to take him to the specialist in Chicago that his current doctor had recommended. "Tomorrow at 10, she agreed, her voice barely audible. "But I want you to know that I'm not the kind of person who takes charity. If I work for you, I'll earn whatever you pay me." Alexander smiled, and, for the first time, Maria noticed that it was a genuinely warm expression, not the practiced smile of someone trying to manipulate her. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Johnson. Something tells me you've never taken the easy way out of anything in your life." As they gathered Timothy's medication and prepared to leave, Maria felt a strange mixture of hope and terror. Hope because for the first time in months she could see a potential path forward that didn't involve choosing between Timothy's health and keeping a roof over their heads. Terror because experience had taught her that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Alexander watched them leave through the pharmacy's glass doors. Maria pushed Timothy's wheelchair with practiced ease, navigating around other customers and through the narrow aisles with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make the best of difficult circumstances. As they reached the sidewalk, he saw Timothy look back through the window and wave at him with a smile that lit up his small face. Standing there in the pharmacy, surrounded by shelves of medications that could heal or harm depending on whether people could afford them, Alexander found himself thinking about paths not taken and choices that had brought him to this moment. He had built his fortune in the medical industry, had profited from the very system that was failing families like Maria's, and yet until today he had never really seen the human cost of pharmaceutical pricing from this close. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether this was the beginning of something meaningful or just an expensive gesture that would fade into memory within a few weeks. But, as Alexander walked back to his office, he found himself hoping that Maria Johnson would prove to be everything his first impression suggested she was. Because something told him that helping her family might end up helping him remember what had driven him to enter the medical field in the first place, before profit margins and quarterly reports had obscured his original intentions to make healthcare better for everyone. Maria stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Sterling Industries, clutching Timothy's hand as they both craned their necks to see the top floors disappearing into the morning clouds. The building seemed to stretch impossibly high, its reflective surface throwing back distorted images of the busy street below. She had taken 3 buses to get here, leaving their apartment at 7 in the morning to ensure they would arrive on time for the 10 o'clock meeting. Timothy wore his best clothes, a button-down shirt that Maria had ironed twice the night before and khaki pants that were slightly too big but looked presentable when tucked in properly. Maria had chosen her outfit carefully too, settling on a navy blue dress that she normally reserved for church and job interviews. It was simple but elegant, and she hoped it struck the right balance between professional and authentic. The lobby of Sterling Industries was more impressive than any space Maria had ever entered. The floors were polished marble that reflected the overhead lighting like a mirror, and the walls featured abstract art pieces that probably cost more than she made in a year. A reception desk curved gracefully along one wall, staffed by 2 women who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. "We're here to see Mr. Sterling," Maria told the receptionist, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. "I'm Maria Johnson. I believe he's expecting us." The receptionist's smile was warm and genuine as she checked her computer screen. "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you. Sandra will escort you to his office." She gestured to a tall woman who had appeared as if from nowhere, dressed in a crisp black suit that probably cost more than Maria's monthly rent. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was silent except for the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. Timothy pressed his nose to the glass wall of the elevator, watching the city shrink below them as they rose higher and higher. Maria had never been this high up in a building before, and the sensation made her slightly dizzy. "Are we really in the clouds, Mama?" Timothy whispered, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "Almost, baby," Maria replied, squeezing his hand gently. She had spent most of the previous evening researching Sterling Industries online at the public library, trying to understand what kind of company Alexander Sterling ran and what his motivation might be for helping them. What she had found was impressive but didn't necessarily answer her questions about his character. Sterling Industries was involved in medical technology development, pharmaceutical research, and healthcare innovation. Alexander Sterling himself was featured in several business magazines as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the medical field. The articles painted him as brilliant but demanding, successful but private. None of them gave Maria any insight into whether he was the kind of person who could be trusted with her family's future. Sandra led them down a hallway lined with windows that offered breathtaking views of the city. The office doors they passed were made of frosted glass with names etched in elegant lettering. Everything about the environment spoke of money and power, and Maria found herself wondering if she had made a mistake in coming here. Alexander's office was at the end of the hallway, behind double doors that Sandra opened with a soft knock. The space beyond was larger than Maria's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline. Alexander stood behind a massive desk made of dark wood, but when he saw them enter, he immediately came around to greet them properly. "Mrs. Johnson, Timothy," he said warmly, extending his hand to Maria and then kneeling down to Timothy's level. "I'm glad you could make it. How are you feeling today, young man?" Timothy, who had been shy and quiet since entering the building, brightened at the attention. "I'm good, Mr. Sterling. Mama gave me my medicine this morning, and I didn't cough at all on the bus right here." "That's wonderful to hear," Alexander replied, and Maria was struck by how genuine his interest seemed. "I have something for you, if it's all right with your mother." He pulled out a small wrapped package from his desk drawer. Maria nodded, curious despite her wariness. Timothy unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a small handheld electronic game. His eyes widened with delight. It was clearly expensive and exactly the kind of thing that Maria could never afford to buy him. "It's an educational puzzle game," Alexander explained to Maria. "I thought Timothy might enjoy it while we talk business. There's a comfortable area over by the windows where he can play." As Timothy settled into a plush chair near the windows with his new game, Alexander gestured for Maria to join him at a small conference table in another corner of the office. The casual seating arrangement felt less intimidating than sitting across from him at his imposing desk. "I want to start by being completely honest with you, Mrs. Johnson," Alexander began, pouring coffee from a silver service that had been set up in advance. "Yesterday at the pharmacy, I made an offer without having fully thought through all the details. I spent last night working out exactly what I had in mind, and I want to present you with a genuine opportunity." Maria accepted the coffee gratefully. It was better than anything she had ever tasted, rich and smooth with no bitter aftertaste. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Sterling. I have to admit, I was skeptical about the whole situation." "You had every right to be skeptical," Alexander acknowledged. "Successful women don't get where they are by trusting every stranger who makes them an offer. And you are successful, Mrs. Johnson, even if your current circumstances don't reflect that." The comment surprised Maria. She certainly didn't feel successful sitting in a billionaire's office, worried about paying rent and buying groceries. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. "In the past 6 months, you've managed to work 3 jobs while caring for a chronically ill child. You've navigated a complex healthcare system to get Timothy the best possible care within your means, and you've maintained your dignity and your family's stability despite circumstances that would have broken many people. That takes intelligence, determination, and strength. Those are the qualities I need for this project." Maria felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the excellent coffee. When was the last time anyone had acknowledged her efforts as accomplishments rather than just survival? "What exactly is this project you mentioned?" Alexander stood and walked to a presentation board that had been set up near his desk. When he pulled away the covering, Maria saw a complex flowchart showing the journey that patients typically took through the healthcare system when dealing with chronic conditions. "This is what we call a patient journey map," he explained. "It shows all the steps someone like Timothy would go through from initial diagnosis to ongoing treatment. What I'm developing is a technology platform that would streamline this process, making it easier for families to access the care they need and the financial assistance that's available." Maria studied the chart with growing interest. She could see her own experience reflected in the complex maze of doctors, specialists, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and assistance programs. "This looks like exactly what families need. But how would it actually work?" "That's where you come in," Alexander said, returning to his seat. "I can design the technology, and I have teams of programmers who can build whatever we dream up. But I don't have the real-world experience of being a patient or a caregiver in this system. I need someone who has lived through these challenges to help me understand what would actually be helpful versus what sounds good in theory." Alexander pulled out a tablet and showed Maria a basic wireframe of a mobile application. "Imagine if you had an app on your phone that could help you find all the assistance programs Timothy qualifies for, track his medications and appointments, connect you with other parents facing similar challenges, and even help you communicate more effectively with his doctors." As Alexander walked through the concept, Maria's excitement grew. She could immediately see how such a tool would have helped her over the past few months. Instead of spending hours on the phone trying to navigate insurance company bureaucracy, she could have had the information at her fingertips. Instead of feeling isolated and overwhelmed, she could have connected with other parents who understood what she was going through. The consulting work would involve you testing early versions of the app, providing feedback on what works and what doesn't, and helping us identify features we haven't thought of, Alexander continued. "Eventually, if things go well, there would be an opportunity for you to join the team permanently as our Director of Patient Experience." Maria's mind reeled at the title. Director of Patient Experience sounded important, official, like the kind of job that came with benefits and stability and maybe even enough income to move to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood with good schools. "What kind of compensation are we talking about for the consulting work?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on practical details despite her growing enthusiasm. Alexander handed her a folder that he had prepared. Inside was a contract outline that made Maria's breath catch in her throat. The consulting fee alone was more than she made in 3 months from all her current jobs combined. The potential salary for the permanent position was enough to transform Timothy's life completely. "I know it seems like a lot," Alexander said, watching her reaction carefully. But, good patient advocates are incredibly valuable. The healthcare industry loses billions of dollars every year because patients can't access the care they need effectively. Someone who can help us solve that problem is worth every penny of this compensation. Maria set the folder down carefully, her hands shaking slightly. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. Why me? You could have patient advocates with medical degrees and years of formal experience. Why are you offering this opportunity to someone you met yesterday in a pharmacy? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city skyline through his office windows. Have you ever heard of survivor bias, Mrs. Johnson? Maria shook her head. It's when we focus on success stories and ignore all the people who didn't make it through the same challenges, he explained. In the medical industry, we tend to design solutions based on feedback from patients who successfully navigated our systems. But what about all the families who gave up along the way? What about the parents who couldn't afford their children's medications or couldn't figure out how to access the help that was theoretically available? He turned back to face her directly. Yesterday, I watched you in that pharmacy, and I saw someone who refuses to give up despite facing obstacles that would have stopped most people. You're not a success story yet in the traditional sense, but you're succeeding in the ways that matter most. You're keeping your family together, you're fighting for your child's health, and you're doing it with a grace and dignity that impressed me more than any medical degree could. Maria felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Timothy was still absorbed in his game by the windows, occasionally glancing over at the adults with curiosity but not concern. There's something else, Alexander continued, his voice softer now. My younger sister died when she was 12. Leukemia. This was 30 years ago, and the treatment options weren't what they are today. But, even with the treatments that were available, my family struggled to navigate the system. We were middle class, not wealthy like I am now, and I remember my parents lying awake at night worrying about medical bills and insurance coverage and whether they were making the right decisions about her care. Maria's expression softened as she saw pain flash across Alexander's features. I'm sorry for your loss. The experience motivated me to get into the medical field, he said. I wanted to be part of making healthcare better. But, somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the business side of things. Profit margins and market share and competitive positioning. Yesterday, watching you with Timothy, I remembered why I started this work in the first place. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way that Maria hadn't expected from someone in Alexander's position. She realized that maybe they both needed this opportunity for reasons that had nothing to do with money. I want to accept your offer, she said finally. But, I have some conditions. Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by her negotiating instinct. I'm listening. First, I want everything in writing, with clear expectations for both sides. I've learned not to rely on handshake deals, no matter how well-intentioned. Absolutely reasonable. Second, I want Timothy to be part of this process when appropriate. He's the real patient here, and he has insights that even I don't have about what it's like to live with a chronic condition. Alexander glanced over at Timothy, who was now completely absorbed in solving a complex puzzle on his new game. I think that's an excellent idea. Children often see things that adults miss. Third, Maria continued, if this doesn't work out for any reason, I want your word that you won't just disappear. Timothy has already experienced enough disappointment in his young life. If you're going to be part of our lives, you need to be someone we can count on. Alexander stood and extended his hand to her. Mrs. Johnson, you have my word. And I think you're going to discover that I'm someone who keeps his promises. As they shook hands, Maria felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, she could imagine a future that included financial security, meaningful work, and hope for Timothy's health and education. It wasn't just about the money, though that would transform their daily lives. It was about being valued for her intelligence and experience, about having her voice heard in rooms where important decisions were made. When would you like me to start? She asked. How about Monday? Alexander suggested. That gives you time to give notice at your current jobs and arrange childcare for Timothy if needed. Actually, Maria said, I'd like to start today, if that's possible. And I'd like to bring Timothy with me when I can. One of the biggest challenges for parents like me is finding reliable, affordable childcare for children with special medical needs. If your company is serious about understanding the patient experience, that's something we need to address. Alexander's smile was genuine and impressed. You're already thinking like a director of patient experience. Welcome to Sterling Industries, Mrs. Johnson. As they finalized the initial arrangements, Maria watched Timothy through the office windows. He had finished his puzzle game and was now pressed against the glass, watching the tiny cars and people moving through the streets far below. For the first time in months, his breathing seemed easy and unlabored, his color was good, and he was smiling with the simple joy of a child who felt safe and secure. Maria knew that challenges lay ahead. Learning a new industry, proving herself in a corporate environment, balancing her advocacy for patients with the business realities of a for-profit company. But, as she gathered her purse and prepared to collect Timothy for their journey home, she felt something she had almost forgotten: excitement about the future. Alexander walked them to the elevator personally, shaking Timothy's hand with the same serious respect he had shown Maria. I'll see you both on Monday, he said. And, Timothy, maybe you can help us test some of the games we're developing for our patient app. Timothy's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? I could help make apps for other kids who are sick like me? Absolutely. We need experts like you to make sure we get it right. As the elevator descended toward the ground floor, Maria watched the city grow larger through the glass walls. Tomorrow she would give notice at her 3 jobs. This weekend she would take Timothy shopping for some new clothes suitable for visiting an office. Monday she would begin a new chapter of their lives, one that promised not just financial stability but the chance to help other families facing the same struggles they had endured. For the first time since Timothy's diagnosis, Maria allowed herself to dream about possibilities instead of just surviving day to day. Maybe they could move to an apartment with better air quality for Timothy's lungs. Maybe she could afford to take him to that specialist in Chicago. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be more than okay. 3 weeks into her new position at Sterling Industries, Maria sat in the company's state-of-the-art conference room, surrounded by software developers, marketing executives, and project managers who looked to her with a respect she was still learning to accept. The patient advocacy app they were developing had evolved rapidly under her guidance, transforming from a basic concept into something that could genuinely help families like hers navigate the complex healthcare system. Timothy sat in a corner of the conference room, quietly working on homework that his teacher had sent with him. His portable oxygen concentrator hummed softly beside his chair, a recent addition to his treatment regimen that Alexander had arranged through his company's connections with medical equipment suppliers. The device was smaller and quieter than the hospital-grade machines Maria had researched but couldn't afford, and it had already made a noticeable difference in Timothy's energy levels. Maria, what do you think about this medication reminder system? Asked Sarah Chen, the lead software developer. She gestured to the large screen where a mock-up of the app interface was displayed. We've designed it to send push notifications when it's time for doses, but we're wondering if that's enough. Maria studied the screen carefully, drawing on her months of experience managing Timothy's complex medication schedule. The reminders are good, but they're only part of the challenge. What happens when you run out of medication? Or when the pharmacy doesn't have it in stock? Or when your insurance suddenly decides they're not going to cover it anymore? She stood and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a marker with growing confidence. Over the past 3 weeks, she had learned that her insights were valued here, that her experience was seen as expertise rather than just personal struggle. Let me show you what happened to us last month, she said, beginning to sketch a timeline on the board. Timothy's medication was supposed to be refilled automatically, but the pharmacy's computer system didn't communicate with our insurance company's system. So when I went to pick up his prescription, they told me it would be $400 because the insurance claimed it wasn't pre-authorized. The room was silent as Maria continued drawing, illustrating the maze of phone calls, transfers, and bureaucratic dead ends that had consumed 2 full days before the problem was resolved. During those 2 days, Timothy was rationing his medication, trying to make his remaining doses last longer. His breathing got worse, I couldn't sleep, and I seriously considered taking him to the emergency room. What finally resolved it? Asked James Morrison, the project manager who had initially been skeptical about including someone without a business background in their planning meetings. Luck, mostly, Maria replied honestly. I happened to call the insurance company at a time when I reached someone who actually understood their own system and was willing to spend 20 minutes figuring out what had gone wrong. But it could have taken much longer, and not every parent has the time or persistence to keep calling until they find the right person. Sarah was typing rapidly on her laptop, taking notes. So the app needs to not just remind people to take medications, but also help them troubleshoot problems with access. Exactly. And it needs to be proactive, not reactive. What if the app could monitor prescription refill dates and insurance authorization deadlines, then alert families a week before potential problems occur? What if it could provide step-by-step guidance for dealing with common insurance issues, or even connect parents directly with patient advocates who can help resolve problems? Alexander, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward with admiration clear in his expression. Over the past 3 weeks, he had watched Maria transform from a nervous mother uncertain of her place in a corporate environment to a confident advocate who commanded the respect of his entire development team. Those are excellent ideas, he said. Sarah, what would it take to implement those features? As the technical team began discussing implementation details, Maria returned to her seat next to Timothy. He looked up from his homework with a smile that made her heart swell with pride. His color was better than it had been in months, partly due to the improved medical care they could now afford, but also because the stress that had been crushing their small family was finally beginning to lift. Are you making the app better for other kids like me, Mama? Timothy whispered. We're trying to, baby, Maria whispered back. What do you think would help kids the most? Timothy considered the question with the seriousness that chronic illness had taught him. Maybe something that explains to kids what their medicines do? And maybe a way to talk to other kids who have to take the same medicines? Maria made a mental note to bring up both suggestions. Timothy often had insights that the adults missed, seeing the emotional and social aspects.